It is a climate of fearfulness, of suspicion about the intent of communism, of a general consensus that they needed to be contained and stopped.
But far more sinister to Americans was home front communism.
We were in the midst of a second Red Scare. In 1947, for instance, the Hollywood 10 were actually declared to be in contempt. The Alger Hiss conviction was in 1950. And McCarthy's list of 205 employees at the State Department who he claimed were members of the American Communist Party was February 9th, 1950.
The reason we were there was simple. The Secretary of State drew a line to encompass all the parts of the Pacific that were of strategic importance to the United States, and it did not include Korea. Pretty easy to understand how that would be the first place tested.
The Cold War strategies are formulated during the build-up to the Korean War and during the Korean War. And that concept of the domino theory, that if one falls to communism, then there will be others, that was something that was being passed around and believed in. Certainly at the level of National Security Council meetings, there was a real need to try to get in there, contain communism, and prevent South Korea from becoming communist.
When they were training for how to defend themselves against an atomic bomb, when you jumped under the desk, you built bunkers in the backyard and all that sort of thing.
When danger threatened him, he never got hurt. He knew just what to do. He ducked and covered.
To me, it's a very real threat.
First, you duck, and then you cover. And very tightly, you cover the back of your neck and your face.
And the UN responds by asking members of the UN to contribute to a force to go in and help South Korea defend itself against this aggression.
Will there be peace or war?
In June of 50, there was hardly anybody to meet them. The South Korean forces weren't up to snuff yet. The American advisors with them were, how do you advise 200 or 300 people, right? So when they're running, you're running.
The American troops that were put in there pushed it all back down around the Pusan, it's called the Pusan perimeter. The Naktong River kind of made an arc around Pusan down in the southeast. And that was we have to stop them here or we all die.
There, they're going to make a brave stand, and from there, MacArthur's going to launch this brilliant amphibious move along the west coast of the Korean Peninsula and land troops at Incheon, which is almost at the border of North Korea. And they will break out of the Pusan perimeter and move north through the peninsula and drive the North Koreans out of South Korea.
MacArthur had them go all the way to Yalu. And once they got up there, the Chinese said, if you come to the Yalu, we will intervene. And apparently nobody believed him.
That MacArthur's intent was to be able to finish them off and have our boys back it was going to be home for Christmas, was the slogan. And it was at that point that the Chinese invade. It's hundreds of thousands of Chinese. They eventually commit 1 million men to this fight. MacArthur's relationship with Truman has deteriorated tremendously. MacArthur is of the opinion that he should be allowed to cross the Yalu, take the war into China. Truman's completely against that. And eventually, Truman fires MacArthur for insubordination and replaces him with Ridgway.
Ridgway took over. And this, going into 1951, he wanted to punish them. So he developed operations to kill as many as they could. Regained the territory, but punish them.
And it's at that point that the war then stalemates on the 38th. The negotiations begin at Panmunjom and drag on for 2 years. In fact, over half of our war dead, those deaths are inflicted during the negotiating process, which is one of the reasons why the war became very unpopular. The casualties were really high for such a brief period. The total number of deaths are in excess of 50,000. in a 3-year period, and it's the same in Vietnam for a 10-year period.
I was part of the Organized Reserve, and when the Korean War started, the Organized Reserve went, and we were in California for probably 6 to 7 weeks, and then went on out to Korea just immediately behind the Incheon invasion in 1950 on the 15th of September.
The struggle between freedom and tyranny, between democracy and communism, is a serious, deadly struggle. And your life, will be affected by it. You also know that your part in that struggle will mean many kinds of service to the cause of freedom, and you will consider that service a part of citizenship.
I was in World War II as a Marine, so and I'd been in the Army for almost a year and a half when I went to Korea. But of course I was a little bit older, and that sometimes it worked to your favor. You kind of think something through rather than just dashing off and doing it. So.
Then the Korean War came along, and I was drafted in the Army, and my baby brother joins the Navy, and he stayed in 22 years.
To tell you the truth, I had a doctor's excuse, if you will, in my pocket when I went towards the draft board, and I made a decision at that time not to show it. So.
We were so tough. We carried our rifle, they called it our wife. We carried our rifle everywhere, even to the latrine. And we slept with that booger, and we ate with it and everything.
I felt very prepared because, as I say, I had 2 years of enlisted time and had gone through the OCS program and had been in the active reserve training other people for about almost 4 years. So, yeah, I felt very well prepared to be an infantry platoon leader, which is what I became.
The young folks are still very proud of the vets that came home from World War II and probably wanted to emulate them. The heroes came home and we wanted to be heroes too.
While I was talking with my battalion commander, a mortar shell, I don't know what size, it might have been an 82 millimeter mortar, dropped in the snowbank, which was about as far from us as your cameraman is right there. And it fragmented it. My radio man unfortunately took the majority of it. I got 4 or 5 pieces across my legs, and my battalion commander got 2 or 3 pieces in his right foot. And his comment was, "Pesky little rascals, aren't they, you know?"
The first night on the outpost, we were under fire. And I was in a hole by myself, and pretty soon, here comes Sergeant Ortegas. Sergeant Ortegas said, Bassett, move over. I said, what's going on, Ortegas? He says, I like to be near a man who can pray.
Actually, what they used to do, they'd line up on one side of the airstrip and go down and then disappear into the fields at the other end and then up the mountains and over the DMZ. And you hardly ever saw anything at night except the flashes. So the next morning we'd always go out with the guys from the L-19 strip and check and see what was out there. A few people in the L-19 strip got hit. None of our people got hit. But a couple of people in the L-19 strip got hit. Nobody, fortunately, got killed. But they're not a lot. But I would say altogether maybe half a dozen bodies in the morning. It all was so fast that it was, like I say, it was really like being in a movie. It was beyond reality almost.
And you had people that came out of the pipeline. That's your line of replacements going to and from Korea. And the first thing you found out about them was they were unique.
One of my buddies that I grew up with, he went over as a replacement. 2 weeks later, he was dead.
I've heard people say they were ordinary people doing extraordinary things, and I disagree with that. They were extraordinary young Americans making the extraordinary look ordinary.
We ran into an ambush. They were waiting for us. And those first 2 boys were killed instantly. And I kind of turned my head around like that. I looked over there, and my buddy's got his hand up. And he was surrounded by Chinese, and they're pointing their burp guns at me. I couldn't kill them all. In fact, if I had fired at them, I'd have probably killed my buddy. And so I surrendered.
They lined us up along the edge of the runway. She came in the helicopter and she paraded in front of the line of troops. So my buddy Jim had a beautiful Leica camera, and I told him, I said, Jim, I says, get that camera ready because we're going to see if we can get our picture taken with Marilyn, you know. And so as she passed in front of us, I stepped out of the line, which was out of line, and said, Marilyn, how about a picture with the Army? And she said, sure, and walked over, and we took the picture. She put on a wonderful show before thousands and thousands of people that night. In fact, we were so far away, it's a good thing I saw her here because I couldn't see her there.
He cut the barbed wire quietly. We all went through it. And we were in the middle of their position, and they didn't even know we were there. We were everywhere. Platoon sergeant got the first shots off. He heard some speaking in there, and he threw a grenade in. And then there was one in the trench, and he shot him. And it was on. The game had started. And the next, I guess, 10 minutes or so, which is the most amazing 10 minutes, it's surreal to me. My guys, all I did basically was watch magnificent Marines execute their plan to a T.
We marched at night, and then we got in a cave early in the morning, and then they, I think the second or third day, they stripped us down and took away our uniform. And that was the most, next to getting captured, that was the most humiliating experience, you know. And they gave me an old Korean uniform, cotton padded. It was winter. And of course, we didn't have our winter uniforms. The thing was filthy. It had blood on it, and it was full of lice. That was my introduction to lice.
I was very fortunate to have one friend that from basic training on, the 2 of us managed to stay together until we were separated at the end. And I think that was a big deal, you know, because we got to know each other very, very well. Although we didn't remain in touch very long afterwards, but at the time it was a stable influence having somebody that you knew well. You know.
I don't regret having the experience, but I wouldn't wish it on anybody. You know, war is hell.
In my case, and by 1953, every point along the lines in Korea had been registered with what they call an artillery or a mortar registration. And so if you're sitting on the lines, if you're sitting out in front of them, you know what the registration numbers are. Fire 20. Boy, they look at that map and they fire 20. See, so you know, you get instant artillery, you get instant mortar support. So a typical patrol would be, I might start at 1300, 1 o'clock. And I'll start at the Corps headquarters, Corps Operations Center. And I'm starting working all my way down, Corps, division, regiment, battalion, down to the company where I'm going to work through. And you're going to say, okay, this is going to be my route tonight. Have you got any fires designated already for that? And the guy might say, yeah, we got a time on target. which means we're going to fire at 11 o'clock tonight and it's going to drop 25 rounds, or actually 24 rounds, high explosive, incendiary, whatever. And you say, oh, okay, can you hold that one up till another time, or can you shift it several hundred meters? Because you don't want to get hit in it.
Fortunately for us, the air support was, turned out to be the real turning factor in the war, to my understanding,
Well, when we got to Pyongyang, we were bombed and strafed by our own planes. They bombed the dickens out of Pyongyang that night, and of course they didn't know. I like to think they didn't know we were down there.
And when the Chinese came, they came in such groups that the machine guns, which were heavy, interlocking bands of fire across our front, they had to be displaced back farther. We were on what's known as the military crest, which gives you, in fact, you could see all the way down and all the way up. They had to displace backwards during the course of the night, twice during the course of the night, because the Chinese bodies were piled so deep in front of the machine guns that there was no field of fire. So they had to move back, so the field of fire was then assured.
We were on a raid on a hill, and he had a grenade go off right in front of him. He was simultaneously shot through the shoulder. I didn't know that. There's a lot going on, And he had a flak jacket on, so that kept anything from hitting the trunk. And for some reason, nothing hit his head or face, but it put like holes you could put your hand in his legs and his arms like that. And he had one finger that was split open. And with all that, he'd say, damn, that finger hurts. And I'm looking at him, I couldn't believe it, It was just a fabulous scene. There's Sam, he's still running this platoon. He's got that plasma going in his arm, and he's taking pulls out of that whiskey, and he's whistling the Marine Corps hymn. And it's dark on a hill in Korea.
All the time. We never had much water or much food. That they had complete control, We were at their mercy. If they say shut up, we shut up. If they say stand up, we stood up.
The platoon sergeant of the machine gun platoon was supervising this, and a grenade came in, and he did the reflexive thing of putting his foot on it, and lost both legs. And, excuse me, wound up with the Medal of Honor. Good man, good man.
It became the centerpiece for the 1952 presidential campaign, and that the Republicans went out and got Dwight Eisenhower to run for president. So here was a real, it was a real in-your-face issue that was on the front page of the newspaper all the time. It was something that that was a world crisis, and it was something that perhaps they could use and keep going, so that they could make a political gain out of it, which, of course, Eisenhower does get elected twice, 52 and 56.
We'll take out to Washington.
We got in there shortly before dusk, and we came under fire. And so I had my exec get on the radio and go back to battalion and find out, why are we being fired on by friendlies? The answer was, those are not friendlies. Our friendlies were run off there about noontime. That's the guys you're looking for. And I'm standing there talking on the radio, which was the old SCR 300, which had a telephone headset, and you're talking like this, And somebody on that hillside decided that, well, whoever that is talking on the phone may have a position of leadership somewhere. And while I'm talking on the phone, a .30 caliber came right in through here, right beside my head, went through my shoulder, took the bottom off the socket, went out through the shoulder blade, split it into 4 pieces, and knocked me over backwards, I'm told. And I got back on the phone and told the battalion exec that I was talking to, I just got shot. And so I was evacuated the following morning.
I always got a kick out of the fact that they took us back to Fort Dix before we mustered out, and they didn't know what to do with us, and they tried to have us, let me paraphrase that, they tried to have us picking up cigarette butts on the base.
Oh, the Screaming Skull, he called us all out on the parade ground, and he's jumping up and down like a baboon, waving his arms, and he says, "You're going home!" We looked at each other. He's lying. We're not going home. He said, you're going to be divided into 2 groups. And the first group will go home in 3 days. And the second group will go home a week later. Naturally, I was in the second group. And the last truck. And I lost a lot of weight that first 30 days. Like I say, I was 185 when I was captured. And when I was released, I weighed 114 pounds.
Remember that it's the first war we didn't win. Now we haven't won several. The American public was used to winning. You went to war and you won, you know. And this one we didn't do anything. It basically wound up a stalemate.
You know, Africa became a mess in the early 1960s. There was Castro in Cuba in 1959. There's the Cuban Missile Crisis in '62, and Korea becomes really forgotten. Truly, it's pushed off the stage. It's forgotten largely because it didn't have, you know, it didn't have the victorious ending. We were able to prevent South Korea from becoming communist, but it didn't have that World War II style magnificent victory, total collapse of the enemy forces, and, you know, dancing in the streets and celebrations.
The most rewarding part of it was the day before we left. We were doing the streets of Seoul, walking around, and it was obvious to the Koreans who we were. And the Koreans on the street, by the way, are a good-looking group. They're well-dressed, their kids are taken care of, and at least on 7 or 8 times, we were approached and said, "Thank you. Thank you for what you did. Makes it all worthwhile."
The preprint is just want to let you know how much I appreciate everything you've done. It really meant a lot. Now, this is a lot of years since. Thank you for all of your information and comments that proved my report to the VA was accurate. Was proud to have served under you as a U.S. Combat Marine, Semper Fi. Glenn Finley. I'm almost breaking up. Well, see, that means more than anything the President could give me, anything Congress could give me. It just, that to me is, as they say, potent medicine.
We, as people, we're absolutely spoiled to death. And we're not used to these kind of hardships. I went for 22 months and 6 days without a bath. We wore the same clothes day and night, never took off our shoes. I can't stand to be around somebody running down America, because I know it's got to be the best place on earth. We have a lot of faults. We have some bad people, but I guess you have bad people everywhere you go.
When you hear something like, the war's over, well, the war might not be quite over, you know.
The war, obviously the war was never over. You know, it's still not over.